They say the quietest people often carry the heaviest stories. But what if the silence belonged to a child? Every morning at precisely 7 a.m., a little girl in a tattered yellow jacket slipped, unnoticed, into a local diner. No words, no smiles, just a whispered order and a pair of eyes that barely met the light. She never missed a day. Until one morning, she simply didn't show up. What followed was a moment that froze time. A luxury SUV, four suited bodyguards, and a man whose presence could shift the air. And then he asked a question no one expected. Who's been helping my daughter? What was he doing there? Who was this girl? And what secret had been hiding in plain sight all along? Let me tell you the story from the beginning. Lena Matthews tightened the straps of her worn apron around her waist, the motion as automatic as breathing after 3 years on the morning shift at Sunny Spoon Diner. Outside, the sky hadn't yet decided whether to rise or hide, but inside the little corner diner, soft, amber lights pushed back the stillness of dawn. She arrived every day at 5 a.m. when the streets were hushed and the city still clung to sleep. That's when she started prepping for the first wave of regulars. Hardworking people with rough hands, early hours, and no time to waste. At 27, Lena was no stranger to exhaustion or the lingering scent of grease that clung to her clothes like a second skin. The pay was barely enough, the tips unpredictable, and the manager had a permanent frown carved into his face. But still, something about this place held her. Something quiet, something human. It lived in the little things, an elderly couple splitting a waffle down the middle like a ritual, two elementary school teachers chatting over lesson plans and toast, and a group of construction workers who never forgot her birthday. The moments weren't grand, but they were real, and they were hers. "Order up," shouted the cook from behind the counter. Lena moved quickly, grabbing the plate of over-easy eggs and crispy hash browns, delivering them with a smile that somehow felt sincere. Even after studying late into the night for her college classes, regulars often joked, "Whatever's in that smile of yours, you should bottle it. Mornings feel less cruel when you're here." What they didn't know was that they were the reason she kept smiling. In a world so full of noise and indifference, this diner was her anchor, a place where eye contact still meant something, where someone noticed if you weren't okay. Sometimes when the morning light hit the cracked diner windows just right, Lena would wonder what her life might have looked like if she'd taken a different road. Finished college on time, landed an office job, maybe even moved away. But those thoughts never lingered. Because every time the bell above the front door chimed and a new guest stepped inside, she was reminded, sometimes a simple greeting can be enough to hold someone together, even if just for one more day. It was a Monday morning, the kind where autumn clung to the streets like a wet curtain. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk, chased by a wind sharp enough to sting the skin. Inside Sunny Spoon Diner, the scent of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee tried its best to push the chill back out the door. At exactly 7 a.m., the bell above the entrance chimed, delicate and hollow. Lena glanced up from the register and paused. A small figure had stepped inside. No more than 10 years old, the girl wore a faded yellow jacket 2 sizes too small, its frayed cuffs barely reaching her wrists. Her jeans were threadbare at the knees, her sneakers damp and muddied. Her hair, unevenly tied into a low ponytail, looked like it had been combed in the dark or not at all. Clutching a backpack to her chest, as if it might deflect stares, she moved quickly and silently to the farthest booth in the corner, her shoulders curled in, making her seem even smaller than she already was. No eye contact, no greeting, just quiet, watchful movement. Like a bird always expecting the next noise to be dangerous. Lena grabbed a menu and approached, her voice softer than usual. "Good morning, sweetheart. Can I get you something?" The girl's head tilted just slightly, her eyes barely visible under the rim of her hood. "Egg sandwich, please," she whispered. Her voice was so faint that Lena had to lean in to catch the words. When the time came to pay, the girl hesitated. She placed a handful of coins and crumpled dollar bills on the table, eyes fixed on the surface like it might swallow her. It wasn't enough. She was nearly $2 short. Her cheeks reddened with silent panic. "It's okay," Lena said gently, her smile unwavering. "We have a student discount." Without waiting for permission, she reached into her apron and covered the difference. Then, with an easy grace, she brought over a warm glass of milk and placed it beside the sandwich. "Growing bones need calcium," she said with a small wink. The girl didn't smile, didn't say thank you. She just lowered her head and ate quietly, quickly, occasionally glancing at the door, as if afraid someone might walk in and find her. But she returned the next day. Same time, same booth, same sandwich. And then I was waiting. Every morning at 7, a quiet ritual unfolded. No one else seemed to notice, but Lena did. And though the girl never offered more than the same order, there was something in her eyes, something just beginning to thaw, that made Lena show up early every single day. Dave turned into a pattern, soft, sacred, and unspoken. At precisely 6:55 a.m., Lena would have the sandwich sizzling on the griddle, the milk poured just right, not too hot, not too cold. By 7 o'clock, the girl would step through the door like clockwork, in that same yellow jacket, her small body tucked into itself, as if trying to disappear. She never varied her order, never looked at the menu, never asked for anything else. But Lena began to notice the little details. How the girl always sat in the same position, back to the wall, with a clear line of sight to the entrance. How her fingers gripped her backpack strap until the food arrived. How she never took her coat off, no matter how warm the diner got. And how, once in a while, as she sipped the milk, her eyes would flick to Lena, just for a second, as if testing if this kindness was still real, still safe. Lena didn't ask questions. She didn't need answers to know when someone was surviving in silence. Instead, she matched the girl's quiet with quiet of her own. A nod, a fresh napkin folded just right, an extra slice of tomato tucked into the sandwich like a secret. On the 15th morning, the routine broke, not with the girl, but with Rick, the manager. He stood beside Lena just as she set down the usual plate. "You giving out free food again?" he asked, loud enough for half the diner to hear. His voice carried that tone she'd come to hate, condescending, sharp-edged, performative. Lena straightened. "She pays most of it, I just help with the difference." Rick scoffed. "She's not a paying customer. This isn't a charity kitchen. Stop playing Mother Teresa in my diner." At the sound of his voice, the girl shrank further into the booth, eyes fixed on the table, jaw tight with shame. Lena felt her heart crack because the weight of that humiliation wasn't unfamiliar. It was the same look Lena had worn at 16, when she couldn't afford a school lunch and a teacher announced it in front of the class. "She's just a child," Lena said softly. "I can't let her go to school hungry." Rick's voice dropped low, but it struck harder. "Not your problem, and if you keep making it your problem, it's coming out of your check." Lena nodded, biting the inside of her cheek. The girl didn't lift her head once. And Lena didn't explain. She didn't tell Rick that sometimes a warm sandwich and a soft voice were the only things holding a child together. She just cleared the plate like nothing had happened, because she knew if she made a scene, the girl might never come back. And that thought was more terrifying than any warning Rick could give. The next morning, a new sign appeared on the break room bulletin board. Plain white paper, red bold letters, and the unmistakable chill of corporate apathy. Notice, no unaccompanied minors will be served without full payment. Staff providing unauthorized discounts will face wage deductions. Management. Lena stared at it, her chest tightening. The message was clear and it had her name all over it, even if it wasn't signed. Rick had decided to make an example of her. Danny, another waitress with perfect eyeliner and a snide smile, snapped a picture with her phone. "Guess your charity case is officially cut off," she said with a smirk, already composing a snarky caption for the staff group chat. By noon, the photo was circulating with emojis and half-hearted jokes about Lena's saint complex. Some of the comments stung more than others. "You shouldn't stick your neck out, Martin," the elderly line cook said gently. "Jobs like this are hard enough without being a murder." Lena didn't reply. She just kept topping off ketchup bottles with mechanical precision, hands moving while her thoughts spiraled elsewhere, toward the girl who would walk in the next morning, not knowing that kindness had a price. At 2:15 that afternoon, Rick called her into his office. It was a narrow room behind the kitchen, cluttered with old invoices, stained receipts, and a single flickering light bulb. On the desk was a sheet of paper. "Sign it," he said, not looking up from whatever spreadsheet he was pretending to read. It was a formal warning. "She's just a kid," Lena began, already hearing her voice shake. "She counts out pennies. She never takes more than—" Rick cut her off. "Not your responsibility. Parents should feed their kids. You're not paid to play social worker." Her fingers trembled as she picked up the pen. She could explain it all, how the girl's jacket got thinner each day, how her silence was too practiced to be natural, how she never came with an adult. But what would that change? Nothing. So she signed. "Don't make me regret keeping you on," Rick added as she stood. "Plenty of people would take your job tomorrow." That night, in her studio apartment where the heat barely worked, Lena stared at the ceiling as streetlights pulsed through the blinds. Her job paid just enough to keep her afloat. Barely. Her student loan payments loomed like anchors around her neck, and shifts that accommodated her night classes were nearly impossible to find elsewhere. But still, the thought of turning that girl away made her feel sick, as if doing nothing would be the same as saying, "You're not worth helping." When morning came, she made her decision. She'd pay for the sandwich. All of it. Every day. Quietly. Out of her own pocket. Because if the world was going to punish kindness, then she'd find a way to do it anyway, without asking permission. The next morning dawned gray and wet, the kind of drizzle that soaked into the bones without ever really turning to rain. Lena arrived early, the diner still dark except for the dull glow of the back kitchen light. She prepped in silence, her hands moving with a quiet urgency. The sandwich was ready by 6:58 a.m. The egg was slightly runny, just the way the girl always finished it. The milk sat warm beside it, a thin curl of steam rising into the cool air. At exactly 7 o'clock, the bell above the door did not ring. Lena glanced up, expecting the flash of yellow fabric, the tiny shoes dragging across the tile floor. Nothing. She told herself to wait. Maybe the girl was running late, maybe her alarm didn't go off, kids miss the bus all the time. But by 7:15, the booth sat empty. By 7:30, Lena had checked the door 3 times and wiped the counter twice without reason. Her stomach tightened. A whisper of worry had started its slow climb to panic. Had she scared her off? Had Rick's outburst pushed the girl away and made her feel like she no longer belonged? Worse, was she sick? Was she hurt? Lena tried to shake the thoughts, but they lingered like fog over the glass. She wrapped the sandwich and left it under the heat lamp, checking the door every time it opened, hoping, aching to see that small silhouette. By 8:15, the diner had settled into its usual rhythm. Forks clanked, coffee poured, and the scent of fried bacon filled the air. Then suddenly, everything stopped. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb outside, not the kind you saw in this part of town. Tinted windows, engine idling low like a lion just outside the cage. 2 men in sharp black suits stepped out first, scanning the street with quick, calculated glances. Then they opened the rear door. The man who emerged wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. He wore a tailored black suit that spoke in quiet volumes. His presence was still but commanding, like gravity. 2 more bodyguards followed as he stepped into the diner. Conversations died mid-sentence. The air shifted. The chairs stopped creaking. Even Rick, who rarely left his office before noon, emerged in a hurry, smoothing the front of his shirt. "Good morning, sir," he said, with an awkward half-bow. "Welcome to Sunny Spoon. How can we—" The man didn't answer. His sharp eyes scanned the diner with quiet precision. I'm looking, he said, voice even and low, for the person who's been helping my daughter. Lena froze by the coffee station, pitcher in hand, heart suddenly hammering like it wanted out of her chest. The men in suits fanned out, subtly, not threatening, but unmistakably alert. I'm not sure I understand, Rick began. The man didn't blink, 10 years old, yellow jacket. She's been coming here every morning. The entire diner held its breath. Lena stepped forward, voice steady despite the storm inside her. That's me, she said quietly. I've been serving her. The man turned slowly to face Lena, studying her. His eyes, sharp, calculating, softened just slightly at the edges. What he saw in her must have quieted whatever suspicions he had come in with, because his next words didn't come with accusation, but something closer to weariness. She hasn't eaten breakfast outside of our home since her mother died, he said, voice low enough that only Lena could truly hear it. You're the first person she's spoken a complete sentence to in 3 years. The entire diner remained frozen. Not even the kitchen dared clatter. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She felt the blood leave her face. I didn't know, she whispered. She didn't tell us, he said, his gaze distant now. Not with words, anyway. But yesterday, she handed her tutor a note. A single sentence is written on a piece of paper she's folded and unfolded for weeks. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and retrieved a familiar scrap of paper, creased and worn, the same one Lena had found under the milk glass just days before. Is hers. This, the man said, holding it like something sacred, was the first sign we've had that she's still in there, that she still wants to connect with the world. Rick stepped forward quickly, his tone now groveling. Mr. Everett, if I may, I personally encourage Miss Matthews to take special care of your daughter. We pride ourselves on being a family-friendly establishment. The man turned his eyes on Rick, and they sharpened again. Really? He asked, voice deceptively calm. Because my security team reviewed the premises before I stepped inside, and they heard a very different story from your staff. Rick paled. Where is she now? Lena asked, unable to stop the question. Her voice cracked. Is she okay? At home with a cold, the man replied, the tension in his shoulders easing a fraction. She was upset about missing breakfast here. Then, without ceremony, he extended his hand. Nathan Everett! The name hit like thunder across the room. Even Lena had heard of him. Tech investor, philanthropist, one of those men whose face appeared on business magazine covers and keynote stages. The kind of man whose shoes cost more than a week's pay in tips. My daughter is Elena, he continued. After her mother's accident, she stopped speaking. Therapists, specialists, medications, nothing worked. Then she wrote your name. He looked at her not like a businessman, not like a powerful man surveying a waitress, but like a father holding on to a fragile miracle. I had to know who you were. Then, quietly, he reached into his coat again. This time, he handed her a card. If you're interested in running your own restaurant, he said, I'd like to fund it fully. Lena stared down at the card. The room spun, but her hand stayed still. I don't understand, she murmured. You gave kindness to my daughter, Nathan said simply, when she was invisible to everyone else. I'd like to return that kindness. 1 month later, just 6 blocks from Sunny Spoon Diner, a new sign hung above a freshly painted storefront. The windows gleamed, the door chimed a soft, welcoming tone each time it opened. On the glass, in delicate white lettering, it read, E&L Mornings. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon, brewed coffee, and something gentler, like comfort folded into every corner. Warm light spilled from vintage lamps overhead. The tables were mismatched but charming, and a soft playlist hummed in the background, never loud enough to intrude on conversation. In the far corner, beside a bookshelf of donated children's books, was a sign that simply read, No child turned away, all students welcome. Lena had insisted on it. The prices were modest and the portions generous. There was a suspended meal board near the register where customers could prepay for meals in advance. Tokens of anonymous kindness, waiting for someone who needed them. Every morning a few tokens would vanish, no questions asked. No judgment was given. Elena came in just after 7 a.m. each day, her yellow jacket now complemented by a miniature apron embroidered with the cafe's logo. She never said much, but she helped. She wiped tables, lined up the napkins with surprising care, and sometimes wrote the daily specials on the chalkboard in her carefully improving handwriting. Sometimes Nathan dropped her off, sometimes a trusted driver came instead, but always, without fail, a generous tip and a quiet note of thanks arrived with her. Lena never asked what Elena had been through. She didn't need to. Some stories were told in silence, in how the girl now lingered a little longer by the counter, how she started waving, barely but still, to the regulars, how she had begun writing in a small purple notebook she kept under her arm. Sometimes Lena would glance up and catch Lena watching her, not with fear anymore, but with quiet admiration, like she was trying to learn how to carry herself the same way Lena did, steady, kind, unshaken. Several familiar faces from Sunny Spoon Diner had found their way to E&L Martin. The elderly line cook had joined Lena's team and brought his secret hash brown recipe with him. The construction workers came in on Fridays. Even a few teachers stopped by before school, drawn by the light and the feeling of something better being built inside. Rick had sent Lena a long, awkward email, half apology, half desperate offer to rehire her with a raise. She never responded, because Lena had found what she didn't know she was searching for, a place where kindness didn't have to be explained, a space where people came not just to eat, but to be seen. One crisp morning, just as Lena was unlocking the front door of E&L Mornings, she found Lena already waiting outside, back straight, hands behind her, eyes bright under the hood of her now comic yellow jacket. There was something different in her that day. Not louder, not more talkative, but steadier, as if the ground beneath her feet had become solid again. "I'm inside," Lena said with a warm smile. "I'll get breakfast started." But Elena shook her head gently and held out a package. Small, square, carefully wrapped in tissue paper with tape too big for its corners. "For you," she said, voice barely more than a breath. It was only the third full sentence Lena had ever heard her speak. Inside the package was a framed photograph printed on glossy paper, a little blurry at the edges. In it, Elena was holding her egg sandwich with both hands, smiling tentatively toward the camera. Not a big smile, not posed, but real, honest, hopeful. Below the photo, in her distinct handwriting, written with careful effort, it said, "Thank you for the milk when I was thirsty, and the kindness when I was hungry." Lena stood there frozen for a moment, fingers gripping the frame. Something in her chest cracked open quietly, and tears welled without permission. She didn't say anything right away. She couldn't. Instead, she reached out and hugged Elena gently, just long enough for the silence to mean something. That afternoon, Lena hung the photo behind the counter, next to the daily specials board. Not as decoration, not even as a reminder, but as a quiet altar to the truth that had carried both of them here. Sometimes the smallest acts of care are the most profound. And that love, real healing love, often enters not with grand gestures, but with warm milk and a gentle nod. The photograph became a kind of compass for the cafe. Staff glanced at it during difficult shifts. Customers asked about the story. Lena never gave interviews, never told the whole tale, but when pressed, she would say one thing: "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just refused to ignore a child who needed to be seen, and that was enough." In the weeks that followed, Elena continued to open up, slowly, on her terms. She began writing poems in her journal. She added extra syrup bottles to tables before customers asked. Once, she even corrected Martin's spelling on the specials board, earning a wink and a laugh from the old cook. She didn't need to be loud to belong. She just needed to be safe. And Lena had given her that. Not with speeches, not with money, just with presence, just with staying